Hello out there YouTubers, it's Silvertardis here with yet another Doctor Who review. Today I'm going to be looking at Cold War by Mark Gatiss, the third episode of Series 7 Part B, starring Matt Smith, Jenna-Louise Coleman, Liam Cunningham and David Warner. Now, this was the episode a lot of fans were hyped up for. Main reason being it featured the return of the Ice Warriors. Now, I did make a video a few months ago telling you about the Ice Warriors and their return, and here's my actual review of the episode. They've only appeared 4 times before on screen, but despite that they are still a very popular monster in Doctor Who's history. And Mark Gatiss, who has written 4 other Doctor Who stories, all of which were very good, he wanted to bring the Ice Warriors back for some time. He kept asking Russell T Davies, and at long last, Stephen Moffat said, yes, let's bring them back. And do they look awesome. A lot of Doctor Who fans are glad that the design of the Ice Warriors is very, very similar to the original design. I didn't think it needed updating in the slightest, and surprisingly, not many people are pissed off about the fact that they don't have pincers anymore, just 3-fingered hands. But I'll talk more about that later. I'll just start talking about the story now. First things first, I'd like to say that Mark Gatiss's idea of having this story on board a submarine in the Cold War was utter genius. Not only is it a fantastic set, what with water spilling out of the ceiling everywhere and it being a very claustrophobic military space with no way out, you literally get a sense of cabin fever with that set. But also the idea of it being set in the Cold War rather than World War I or World War II, because the younger audience, they've got some idea about World Wars I and II. I don't think many of them know that much about the Cold War, and during the classic series they never really dived into that, if you'll pardon the pun. Yeah, they never really explored the Cold War in great detail, and with good reason. Doctor Who was brought out in 1963, around the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Polaris submarine incident, both of which were events where people thought, oh heck, we really are all going to die. At the very beginning of the story, right off the bat, you get a sense of this because they're about to test fire some nuclear missiles, although why they didn't actually press the button, I don't know. Were they just reenacting it for the hell of it? Did they receive some false orders from Moscow? That never really gets answered. And the Doctor has to keep explaining to Clara throughout this story that the 80s wasn't all it was cracked up to be. People came very, very close to actually going to war. This episode was directed by Douglas McKinnon, who also directed The Power of Three in Part 1 of the series, and he didn't do a bad job there. He does an even better job there. Like I said earlier on, you really get the impression you are in a sinking submarine with weapons of mass destruction stashed on board. And for the first time in years, Doctor Who's gone back to using models. The production team built 2 models of the submarine, both of different scale, and they both look great. In fact, I think I'd go as far to say it's the best model submarine since, well, the picture speaks for itself. Moving on. Now, besides the Ice Warrior, there are only 2 supporting characters I can really talk about. The first is Captain Zukov, played by Liam Cunningham, and he does a good job in this role. You get the sense that he is the man in charge, and at first he doesn't trust the Doctor or Clara at all, despite the fact he's got a monster running loose on his ship, because he's not prepared to believe anyone with a Western accent, because obviously, like I've said, this is set in the Cold War. Never trust anyone. Despite this, you also get the sense that this is a man who doesn't want to go to war. He's a trained soldier. He's willing to have his men shoot intruders or deserters or whatever if necessary, but this isn't the sort of man who wants to go to war, which is more than you can say for his lieutenant, played by Tobias Menzies, who wants to strike out at the Americans before they strike first, and he's looking for any excuse to go to war with America and wipe them out. But in my opinion, the best supporting character by far in this story is David Warner as Professor Grinsico. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Now, David Warner is no stranger to Doctor Who, and more to the point, he's a brilliant actor. He's played Hamlet, of course. He played the main villain from the Dreamland animated special back in 2009, and he's also done work with Big Finish Productions. Recently he played the main villain, called Cuthbert, in The Sands of Life, and I'd highly recommend you get that. Now, I got some genuine laughs out of this character, like at the beginning when they're about to fire the missiles, and he's in the background singing to some 80s music. In fact, that's an obsession of his in this story. He's a big fan of 80s music, and that scene where he's asking Clara what the future will be like, we're all expecting for him to ask, oh, do we have a war? Which side wins, the Soviets or the Americans? And Clara's trying desperately not to tell him, but in fact he just wants to ask if a certain band splits up or not. And I couldn't help but smile at that bit. Now, as well as being a Muppet, the Professor, he's something of a reassuring figure towards Clara, even though he doesn't have the hindsight that she has. He keeps trying to reassure her, we're going to get out of this alive, don't you worry. And I'm thinking, yeah, he's just like a kind old caring grandfather. But of course, I can't go any further without talking about Grand Marshal Skaldak, the Ice Warrior. He's played by Spencer Wilding and voiced, as you might expect, by Nicholas Briggs. If you've heard any of the Big Finish audios, such as Thin Ice and Mission to Magnus, you know that Nicholas Briggs can voice just about anything, Ice Warriors in particular. Now, from the clips we got before the episode, it did sound a bit more like a Jadoon voice, but here you could definitely hear the classic alien hiss in the voice, but for some reason, at some points, he sounded a bit like Predator. That was weird. You may or may not have noticed that this story, it bears a remarkable resemblance to the Dalek story from 2005. The Doctor and the companion turn up in a location filled with soldiers. They meet the people in charge. The Doctor meets the monster gets chained up. The companion goes to have a talk with the monster breaks out, kills certain members of the crew. The Doctor tries to persuade the monster not to go on killing for no good reason. The monster carries on killing because there's nothing else left for him, unlimited rice pudding, etc., etc. Now, there is of course one big difference between the Daleks and the Ice Warriors. With the Ice Warriors, you get individuals. That's the case with a lot of monsters like the Silurians and the Sontarans. Amongst these vast armies, you get individuals, which you certainly can't do with the Daleks. And if you have one of these individuals on their own, with the Doctor or the companion, you get the chance to hear a bit about them, a bit about their home, their family, their past, whatever. And this is what Mark Gatiss did when he was writing the scenes with Skaldak and Clara in the torpedo room. And I think that was a smart thing to do on Mark Gatiss's part, because with the Ice Warriors in the classic series, you didn't have much of a story to go on other than the fact that they were looking for a new home. But here we hear all about this particular warrior and his family, who he's pretty sure are all dead by now. This episode takes the Ice Warriors to a whole new level, because, like I said, they have the redesign, and I think the suit looks awesome. Although, with that said, I think it is a bit too high-tech. If you watch the classic episodes, none of the Ice Warriors in that story had the suits that opened, nor did they have wires coming out of their fingertips. So, I didn't think, since when were their suits that high-tech? That was never the case in the classic series. But I will say, when Clara finds out the suit was empty, and it just opens to reveal nothing inside, my jaw absolutely dropped, and I was thinking, oh my god, we're actually going to see the Ice Warriors out of their armour. This is going to be awesome. But there are a couple of problems with this. First of all, Mark Gatiss had a big challenge on his hands, because we've never seen the Ice Warriors out of armour before. We've never seen what's actually underneath that helmet. So the production team must have really been scratching their brains thinking, what is this thing going to look like? And before this episode, I was hoping that they didn't make them too much like the new Silurians, because otherwise it would be very hard to tell them apart. But while I like the design of the face they actually went with, in particular I like the fact that the eyes glowed red even without the helmet. That was creepy. But when he takes the helmet off, you can tell that is obviously CGI, and it looks a bit crap. Second big problem is, once he's out of his armour, Skaldak moves like a predator. Not just sounds like a predator, he moves like one. You could say that he's out of his armour, he's able to move a lot quicker. But the old Ice Warriors, whilst they were big and powerful, it was stated a number of times they were very, very slow and exposed to heat. And I know what you're going to say. Skaldak is desperate. He's got nothing left to live for. He's going to take a leap of faith and just get to the missiles without his armour. And for most of the episode, the most we see of him out of his armour is his hands. And my god, what were they thinking? His hands look like they belong to the Grinch. Another problem is that once Skaldak leaves his armour, he starts killing members of the crew and cutting them open with his bare hands in order to find out their strengths and weaknesses, and therefore find out a way of killing them. That would work normally, but I think you're forgetting something. He's inside a sub filled with nuclear missiles, and someone's already told him that. So why is he bothering to cut people open and find out their weaknesses? We're talking about nuclear missiles here. Don't you think those could do the job? But let's not forget the biggest problem with Skaldak leaving his armour. Once he's been out of his armour and he's confronted by the captain, the doctor, and Clara, and he's holding the professor's head, he calls his own armour to him. And I'm thinking, Mark, I know you're trying to mark this as the big return for the Ice Warriors, but there's only so far you can go without turning them into robots. And that suit was chained up, wasn't it? So why didn't he just stay in the suit? If that suit is able to break away from those chains, then what was the point of him leaving it? Seriously, he could have just broken away the moment he got captured and gone straight to the missile control room. Let's see, I need to think of something positive. Oh yes, Matt Smith, good as the Doctor once again, although that goes without saying. Jenna-Louise Coleman, once again, very good as Clara. Now, on the subject of Clara, last week I think she officially became a proper companion. She's gotten into the TARDIS lifestyle, but she'd taken everything in her stride in that story, and at the beginning of this one, that's pretty much the case as well. But the moment people start dying, and with everything the Doctor tells her about the potential end of humanity, she starts to get the big picture and how dangerous this is. But at the same time, there are still some things that surprise her, like she learns about the TARDIS translation matrix, and we're also reminded that these people are meant to be Russian, and we're just hearing them in English, accents and everything. And for the first time in, well, I don't know, 20 years or so, it's definitely never been brought up in the new series before, we have the hostile action transplacement system, or the HADS for short. Basically, when the TARDIS is attacked, it just materializes and relocates to a safer landing place. So that was a nice reference, and I hope we see more of that later on in the series. Now, like I said, Matt Smith, very good as the Doctor. Some great gags, like when he gets his sonic screwdriver back and he goes, "Professor, I could just kiss you." And that bit where he's messing with the controls and he thinks he's accidentally launched one of the missiles, and it turns out to be pressure. And I was actually thinking there for a minute, God, Doctor, you've actually gone and done it now. Now, as for the ending, I think that was pretty satisfying. Good to see that the Doctor isn't saving the day with his sonic screwdriver, although he does nearly blow them up with it. And it's good to see that they're not being saved by the power of love or something. It's actually the villain thinking about his big decision about condemning a whole planet to death. So I rather think that was a satisfying ending. And I have to say, the Ice Warrior spaceship does look pretty awesome. So, conclusion, I guess. Overall, once again, Mark Gatiss, I think, has put together a very, very good story, but it's not what I'd call perfect. I think it's slightly better than The Bells of St. John, I think just on par with Dinosaurs on a Spaceship, I think. So it's one of the best this series. So I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. So see you guys next time for Hide.